And so it's all on the foundation of just, I'm going to be a really great real estate investor. I'm going to have all my financials in place. And then I can be intentional about upgrading the health, safety, the social impacts, the affordability, the energy efficiency, the carbon, the stormwater runoff, native plantings. I mean, all of the different dimensions of this very specifically green actions you could take for that property to make it a little greener, a little greener, a little greener. Then you'll have some breathing room. You'll have some freedom to make choices. And that's what you're talking about the compound effect in the long term. But it's all built on a foundation of, you got to know your stuff.
This is the Regenerative Real Estate Podcast. Revitalizing the world together. Welcome to the Regenerative Real Estate Podcast. This is your host, Neil Collins. It is a show that is supported by our work at Latitude Realty. In it, we explore our natural and built environments and how they can be used as a force for good. The show sets out to inspire impactful ideas, meaningful change, human wellness, and ecological restoration through interviews and easy-to-digest conversations. Our guests range from industry leaders to iconoclasts, from both well-known figures to everyday people leading extraordinary lives. This is a show for people looking for education and inspiration on how real estate can be done differently. Hey everybody, welcome back to the Regenerative Real Estate Podcast. I'm really looking forward to introducing today's guest, Seth Novak out of Madison. Seth, welcome to the show.
It's great to be here with you, Neil.
Seth, I want to give the listeners just a taste of our conversation that we had last week. We got introduced by a mutual colleague, and he had said, hey, you should reach out to Seth because he is doing green real estate investing work. And we got on the phone, and I think an hour was up after a couple minutes. And I just was floored with your background and the work that you've done and that you're currently doing. And I see a lot of parallels with our work. Not only on just a philosophical level, but even on a real estate investing level. And so I really want to start with Seth. What's your background? Give us an insight into who you are.
Sure. Well, I do, as you called it, green real estate investing. Could call it sustainable or regenerative. But what I do is I buy rental properties, usually relatively small ones, 1 to 4 unit residential rentals or group houses, and operate them. So my purchase is from a green perspective, and my management and my ultimate goal with the properties is to reduce carbon, to have care for the people who live there. They're all affordable relative to the market across the board. We've got 26 residents right now in 5 properties around Wisconsin. And how I came here to this mission of building a portfolio of green rental properties started decades ago when I was working as an employee in a multifamily affordable housing. And these were cooperative, nonprofit affordable housing group houses, essentially, is the way it was organized. And I did that for many, many years with student housing, senior housing, community and family affordable housing. But the thing that really shaped me and shaped my philosophy of what I'm doing now, as my cat tries to get the window blinds open, is to see things. I had so much interaction with the residents. And so effectively, my boss was the board of directors, which was elected by the people who lived in the houses. And I also lived in one of the co-op houses. So for many, many, many years, I was right there with people who couldn't pay their rent, roommate disputes, everything that happens in society, all becomes like very immediate when you're living with a group of other people, 10 to 20 other human beings and you're eating meals together. You've got common space. Somebody doesn't clean the bathroom, it becomes an issue for somebody who needs a really sanitary house. All of these things, just the human experience of living with people. And some people are graduate students, from a privileged background. Other people were, just barely trying to make ends meet, working for a living. People had addictions. So it was like out there in the community, real life happening, and how do we provide housing for each other? And those were the people that were my employer. So my job was to help everything run smoothly. And people were really concerned about things like the environment, so we would compost, we had gardens, we had solar hot water, we would pay attention to the efficiency of our water heater, to insulation. Recycling was always a thing. Most people who lived in these houses didn't have cars, so our transportation carbon footprint was a lot lower than on average in our society. But the years and years of doing things like, I had to be the one to evict my housemates if they couldn't pay their rent. So we would meet there in small claims court and try and work things out. But it just gave me a deep in my heart sense of what do renters want, what actually has value, and what is truly sustainable from a triple bottom line perspective. Not just the types of specific environmental actions that I mentioned before, but certainly affordability is there, but then also the human relationships that are involved in rental property housing. So that's kind of where I was shaped. And the whole time I knew that there was this world of real estate investing and that I could own properties, I could do the property management of them, but it was sort of outside of my world because I was so in the trenches with people on a day-to-day basis. So that was the early decades. And then there was a whole next chapter, which was I decided I had to get a professional job. And so I went back to grad school and I studied energy analysis and policy. And I went to work for essentially a think tank, a research nonprofit in DC, doing energy efficiency program and policy analysis. And that may seem like it's in a completely different, career track, totally different. But in my mind, it was a natural continuation because not only did I want to make more money, but I also wanted to get out there into having a larger impact on society. And in this organization, I got to do some serious research, peer-reviewed, published reports that policymakers would actually use, particularly in the area of natural gas and electric utility energy efficiency programs. Now, I realize that's a lot of words, but here's the big takeaway from that 13-year segment of my life. The way that we account for the laws, the things that are valued in energy efficiency are just a very small portion of the true value that's being created. Because if you insulate your rental property and you're using less natural gas to heat it, and there's lower carbon emissions, the way that our current regulatory structure values that is basically just the energy cost. And it's not only, it's the wholesale cost of the energy, not even the real things that matter to people. Like, do you have a comfortable place to live that is warm in the winter, and can you afford it? Those are the kinds of things, the non-energy benefits, we call them. So there's this amount that gets counted or monetized of the energy efficiency, and then there's all of the other social benefits that fall outside of the way our current economy and finance evaluation really looks at things. And you start to think about this, map that basic idea on what is it that we're measuring onto real estate investing. And you talk to your average, person, maybe they own a duplex, they have a day job, they inherited the house, now they just rent it out as an income source. They figure, well, this will build my retirement uh, wealth. So 20 years from now, I'll have the mortgage paid off and it'll be a great source of income. But they're mostly concerned about, do the tenants pay their rent? How much rent can they get? How much hassle is involved? Do you have to respond to maintenance requests in the middle of the night? These types of things. So it's, did I get my rent money coming in the mailbox? And then, how much time and effort did I have to spend dealing with tenants, screening tenants, suing them if they don't pay, that type of thing. And I put these two worlds together and I thought, if we want to really create value in rental properties and we open up our perspective beyond just how can I make money at this, but how can I be of service to people? How can I be a steward of all these resources? Because if you really simplified it down, if you're a renter and you work for a living, you're not building asset value, you're not building equity. And if you're a real estate investor, if you're the landlord and you own some rental properties, even if you just own a few, you've got at least $1 million worth of assets there. And you also have this opportunity to make a difference for people. You have an opportunity to say, it doesn't exactly increase my return on investment in the short term, but if I spent a few $1,000s insulating this property, it would reduce the carbon emissions, it would reduce my tenants' utility bills, it would make it a more comfortable place. What if we just made sure that the furnace was tuned up? Would the air quality be better if we made sure that the filters in the furnaces were changed regularly? And I started to see this expansive view of all of the different ways that we could increase value in the experience of the renter, in the quality and the longevity of the property itself, the asset value. And ultimately, if you start to think from the perspective of not what is the short-term immediate ROI of taking a green action or instituting an energy efficiency measure or adding solar or putting in a covered bicycle rack, or putting in a rain garden into the yard, or cutting down some weed trees that are, shading where you could have solar panels. That was one of the first things I did on one of my first properties. Is there was these huge box elders leaning up over the house. And if we had one ice storm, it would have just taken out half the house. So I paid somebody to climb up there with a chainsaw and take them out. And then I put in the solar, which has since paid for itself entirely. But now, by renting out the upstairs unit here, I can go to this person and say, I'm paying all the utilities. The rent is lower than any comparable studio apartment you could get. More than half of, or it's actually about 40% of our electricity comes from our own solar panels, and the rest goes out onto the grid. And there's a garden, and we compost, and we're on a bike route, and we're on a bus route, and we're right near the bike path. Plus, we're 2 blocks from a grocery store, so it's a super walkable place. You start to think about all the different green dimensions and the value that I'm providing for someone. As it turns out, in this particular property, they just renew year after year after year, because I'm actually providing this. Really, it's an opportunity for me to give something to somebody. But here, if you look at it from the strictly financial point of view, even though I'm undercharging for rent, by having that person paying me this money every month, they're totally covering my mortgage, principal and interest, and insurance costs. So it just totally changed the financial equation of this investment. It's just a two-unit small house. But if you expand that out, if we could measure the value that we're adding here, we're using is a much lower carbon footprint from this property than any comparable property on the block. And by reducing all of the stress, like if I was to maximize the rent and then charge the higher utility bills to my upstairs tenant, in the long run, how much more likely would I be to have somebody who couldn't pay? Well, or maybe I could screen and just have a higher income person living there, but they could live anywhere. They don't need to live in a particularly affordable place with low or no utility bills. And so there's these social implications of what we're doing. The other thing is that for me as a landlord, real estate investor, it's just so much easier to know I'm never going to have any vacancies. I never have any late rent payments. In fact, sometimes they'll just put it on auto pay. So it just goes right into my business checking account. I don't need to collect rent ever. And I started to think, well, the things that I've been doing in these properties are not rocket science. And just shifting the perspective from how can I maximize my return on investment in dollar terms to what I really want is I want to be a good steward of resources. I want to leverage the bank loans that helps me buy the property so that I can help people and provide a great place to live, that it's healthy to live in, that is convenient for people to live in, that's safe to live in. And all of these social values are usually outside of the way real estate investors run their business. Now, of course, you can't just oversimplify or stereotype real estate investors as they're only in it for the money. I mean, people have a whole array of different value systems that are in place. But on average, in our culture, the focus is on, well, why did you invest in real estate? Well, to make money. That's why else would I do it? And the only problem is those darn tenants, they don't take care of the place. I got to evict them. They're always complaining about this or that or the other thing. But if you turn that around and say, I'm going to create a living situation for people where it's seamless, it's healthy, it's easy to live in, it's easy to afford. Plus, we're doing all of us, that is me and the tenants together, are doing our part for the larger community. Suddenly, a lot of the friction and the stress just evaporates. And that's really what I'm aiming to do. So now I'm starting a new business that will reach out to other real estate investors who care about the environment, who have a triple bottom line perspective, so that we can combine our thinking and really start to come up with a program. Like, say you never thought about any of this stuff before, but it sounds good. How would we go about doing it? What are the investments you would make in the property? How would you buy different properties? Because this one has a sunny rooftop and you could just put solar on it right away. And this other one is shaded, so it wouldn't be a good candidate for solar. This one's on a bike path and this one isn't. The price in the market is the same for those houses, potentially. But all other things being equal, why wouldn't we want to buy green and with our aim of building a portfolio of really sustainable houses when we have the choice? It just makes life so much easier if there isn't this, not antagonistic, but extremely transactional landlord-tenant relationship. Let's look at it as we're partners here. And the more I can serve you, the more value I can provide in the long run, it's going to be the best for my investment portfolio.
I think that what you're saying is not only a necessary thing, but it is there's a rising group of people that are sharing those same sentiments. But you're right; they're left with the questions of how do I do that? Real estate is the epitome of a transactional industry, from how do you buy it and how do you sell it to how do you manage it, and rent comes in, expenses go out. That's kind of the world, and it gets reduced down to a system, especially once you're handing off a property to a property manager. They're running it a certain way, and that can be a bear whenever you scale. So I'm very curious, what's the pragmatics of doing this? How do you lower the perceived barrier to make upgrades, to really transition properties so that they are healthier, brighter, more efficient, more comfortable, and things like that?
Well, the starting point for me, and I created this acronym, which is, you might have heard of continuous and never ending improvement from the total quality management movement in the manufacturing world, where you start to measure things and then you say, well, how can we go like 1% better on this metric or that metric? And I just changed that to be continuous and never ending sustainability improvement. So it starts out with, well, what are your goals? And then the beauty of this is that if you start to look at all the different pieces of, here I own this 2-unit or this 4-unit rental property, or even just a single family home rental, you can look at every single system in that house, everything in your business, from, well, what is included in the lease, to how do I collect rent? How do we manage the yard and the stormwater runoff? Like, there's literally hundreds and hundreds of things that you could do. And if you start with a proposition that you want to do something, and you're just looking for ideas, and this is, I will probably produce sort of an action step idea book for people. So it's like, well, what are 100 ways you could increase the energy efficiency of a rental property? And then you can just line them up. What's the lowest cost, easiest to do, highest return on investment, and how much are you willing to put in? I think the friction comes when I'm talking to a real estate investor saying, I do this thing called sustainable real estate investing. And they're like, so I should spend $50,000 doing a whole house retrofit and putting on solar and spend all this money. How am I ever going to see that back? It doesn't pay for itself. Forget about it. My point of view is, let's just value. Let's start out with our own criteria and say, it's important to us that the indoor air quality in our rental houses be at least safe. So we can start with things that are already supposedly the baseline. Is there a carbon monoxide detector? Well, I think in some areas it's required by law, but have you checked the batteries recently? I caught myself on this recently because it didn't smell very good in the house, and I thought, I wonder if there's a problem with like the furnace or something. Like, is it not burning the gas or whatever? And I went down and I couldn't find my carbon monoxide detector. So, that one was on me, but it's like a little step forward. And what I would ultimately like to create for people is a sequence or a process, an evaluation guide. So what are the first easy, low-hanging fruit things that you could do for a property that you already own? Sometimes, like if you're talking energy efficiency or solar, there's already rebates and incentives that are out there. So before you go about getting a site assessment, getting a home performance evaluation, or what used to be called an energy audit, you can see, well, maybe there's some free money for this stuff. And so it's almost never as expensive as you think it is. And each one of these pieces, we can kind of chunk it down to what are the few things that I'm going to do now, and then just do a few more things every year. The first year I bought this place, I took out those box elders, and then I took out some old lead pipes, then I took out some old wiring. And you're like, well, you would do those things anyway if you just wanted to be a baseline good landlord, right? I'm like, sure, but we're not going to get to some sort of perfect permaculture, green utopia from day one. It's a process. And as the years go by, then I had the home performance assessment, and they gave me a list based on what's the payback period for these various investments. So I definitely insulated the attic right away and had the top plate sealed and put some foam around the top of the basement foundation, and just did the things that they recommended. Cost a few $1,000s, and much to my chagrin, it didn't really reduce the heating cost very much. And I'm here in Wisconsin. So you would have thought that all that insulation and work on the building envelope would have been a big payoff, or at least somewhat of a payoff. But no, the only real difference is that the house is more comfortable now. And I'm okay with that. Because if you've got things like this in the budget, over time, you have a more and more valuable, a better place to live for people, even though you could say, well, I spent this much. I want at least 20% profit by the next year on each investment. And that's the kind of limiting thinking that that a lot of real estate investors are trained in. I mean, I've been to real estate investor trainings where they literally say, remember, you're not buying houses, you're buying numbers. The only thing you should focus on is what is my stream of rental income versus my operating costs. And just have those blinders on all the time. And I'm not saying that you shouldn't maximize revenue because you're an investor, but it's incredibly freeing when you start to open it up and look at more criteria and take a longer term perspective. And that you start to think about, well, if I'm viewed as a really good landlord, people will want to rent from me. But if I'm viewed as stingy or just doing the bare minimum, I'm not going to get as much love from my tenants. And as an independent landlord, that kind of thing makes a big difference, having just the relationships with people. So if I'm starting out with how can I make this a better place to live, what are the range of 100 different things that I could do, then that gives me a lot more freedom to move rather than having to just worry about, well, if I spend $5,000 on insulation, I won't have as much in my reserves for next year. It's like, well, as you go along and you make the property better and better, more and more sustainable, you put in higher, because often energy efficient appliances tend to be fancier appliances, and yeah, they cost more up front, but then you don't have to replace them as often. So if your old furnace dies, you might want to pay an extra $1,000 and get a better, even if it's just a little bit more efficient, it's going to be a better piece of equipment, and then you won't have to give us as much time and attention in the future.
Hey everybody, this is Neil. We are going to get back to this great conversation in just 1 second. But I think it's fair to say that right now we are facing some pretty unprecedented challenges in the 21st century. I mean, you name it, environmentally, socially, economically, we've got some big problems that we need to overcome. And that's why, for me personally, and the people that work with us at Latitude, we want to dedicate our time and our energy so that we are not only working to put food on the table and a roof over our heads, but also make the world a better place. And so if you are at all interested in combining your sustainability values with a very powerful financial model of real estate, then I highly encourage you to check out what we are doing at Latitude. We are creating something truly special with a tribe of change agents that for now is working across North America. And hopefully one day in the future, with you coming on board, we can be working across the globe. So please check us out. You can go to www.chooselatitude.com, or you can find us on social media at latitude.realty on Instagram, and we are also on Facebook. Okay, let's get back into it. Yeah. And this is the parallels between our work and what you're doing. And I want to really underscore for the listeners that you're not talking about, hey, I'm just frivolously spending money and I'm not expecting a return on it. You're actually looking multidimensionally at return. And I come from ownership of a growing property management company that we really dove into these issues. And for us, what we had to do was flip the metric to put what is our vacancy rate as kind of the ultimate thing, that if you can dial that in to get it as low as possible, a lot of these other benefits fall into place of how do you decrease your expenses on a property. Well, it means that you are putting in better quality appliances and things that aren't going to break and cause you to, have to go deal with an issue on Thanksgiving Day, or you are treating your residents a little bit better and not as just chattel in the system. And something that you did point out is, you're not having to constantly turn over a rental unit every single year. And that's pretty significant, that if you're decreasing your vacancy, which a lot of people do not account for, because new investors, especially, they get into the business and they're instructed, I need to create a pro forma. What's the income on it? And then what are my monthly expenses going to be? What's my debt service from the mortgage? And the leftover bit is going to be my cash flow. But the hidden factor in all that is that they rarely take into account vacancy, or they just boil it down to like, oh, what's the industry average? But if you never have a vacancy, or what I love is like there are places out there that they have put this kind of approach forward. And not only do they receive fewer vacancies and turnovers, but they have waiting lists. And it's incredible to see, wow, if you want to boost a pro forma, then you need to create a very desirable place to live. And I do think the big X factor in all of that is how do you communicate those benefits to your residents? You know, how do they know? I mean, if you have the energy efficiency, indoor air quality, lower utility bills, and all that, and you're not able to talk about that, and you're not putting that forward in your marketing, then you will have a bit of a rub there. What are you doing to really communicate how you're doing it different from other properties and landlords?
Well, I'm not sure if my experience necessarily maps onto other people because I haven't had to advertise for the last 9 years. I just never have to. Another factor in that is that several of my properties are group houses that have a lease, and the people who live there handle all of the screening and all of the collection from each other, and I just get one rent check per month. And then I have a multi-year lease for those groups. So they have a lot more control over the property, and yes, a lot more responsibility for it. But some of these places are in Milwaukee. I live in Madison. I don't want to have to be driving back and forth, checking up on details, handling minor maintenance. I just give them they end up paying less individually to the house and rent. And because it's a group house, they have more human beings per cubic foot. So it ends up being way less expensive. But then they get to run it almost like a giant family type of operation, or it's almost like a co-op kind of thing. You know, some people shovel the snow, some people, will, if there's a scuff on the wall, they'll get the paintbrush out and take care of it. But if it's major maintenance, I'll get the call and I'll just get the furnace fixed. So there's no advertising required. I just create such desirable places that, in fact, my upstairs person here, she's been here for 7 years or so, and she's working on her PhDs, right? So she just keeps renewing every year, right? One more year. And she said, this year I wasn't going to stay, but coronavirus, I'm going to stay. And next year, I promise I'll find you somebody really good to move in. So I don't know anything about advertising. The best advertising is just providing something that's extremely valuable for people, and then maintaining integrity with what they can expect from you. I guess the other thing I would say is, as far as signaling and communicating, is on this house, I've got a non-standard rental provision, which has no legal standing or teeth to it whatsoever, but it's just a paragraph saying, we're trying to live sustainably here. We try to use our resources well. I think it has this vague aspirational language, like we strive to protect the earth and that kind of thing. And does it actively mean anything in practice? Probably not, but it's one of the first things that somebody sees when they sign the lease. They're like, oh, there's this paragraph here, and it says, there is a compost heap in the backyard. If you want to put your food scraps in it, you could do that. And I think there's a sort of a cumulative effect that, and this might sound a little bit woo-woo, but my philosophy is that if you really are committed to creating a certain type of living environment for people, and you just take action on that year after year, that somehow people will sense that. They will sense that you're genuinely trying to do something that's different, and that will come to them by osmosis or some, or I don't know, maybe it's magical thinking, but um, I think that especially if you have multiple properties and you've been doing this for a while, that there's an effect where people can start to see the overall ways that your properties are different than the ones next door or down the street.
Yeah, oh man, I've actually even pushed back on other podcast guests saying, this sounds a little woo woo. I think it is all about the energetics that you're putting out there, and in the compound effect that comes back from that. You did say that this is a process, and for the listeners, it is a process. This goes for your rental properties. It goes for your house. That a lot of people come to us and they say, well, show me a regenerative property. I'm like, it is not just hey, let's go out and I'll show you just thousands of sustainable and regenerative properties, but I can show you features on every single property that, hey, this is something that you can focus on, or here's a list of things. And even whenever you're managing a portfolio of rental properties, for the people that want to go do that you're doing, having a list of future items that you're going to put on there for continuous improvement of, you don't have to take out that inefficient furnace and upgrade your dishwasher and your microwave and your refrigerator and all these things all at the same time. But if one goes out, if you have a turnover, if you've got, the refinance, if you've got that schedule, you can have that continuous improvement. And I have never heard of anybody really combining the system of continual improvement that was really popularized by Japanese auto manufacturers with rental properties. So kudos to you on really bridging that link, and I think that it really does show up into something unique. And I love that you're doing it, and I love that you're seeing the tangible results on the back end. I mean, to have a resident stay for 7 years and then find their replacement is truly incredible. Like that's progress for sure.
And there's some contextual factors that I think are very important, and I want viewers to have this in mind, is that it starts with, you have to know what you're doing as a real estate investor first, and buy deals where there's some room, where there's some real profit. If you're cutting it close and if you buy a place below market value and you have a lot of rehab to do, if that rehab goes over and you want to have this as a long-term rental, suddenly you don't have as much equity in there to begin with. So knowing all the fundamentals of being a really good manager and an astute real estate investor, and understanding the financing and the acquisition strategies can set you up so you have enough breathing room so that you can have that $5,000 for the energy efficiency, or $10,000 in cash to put up solar on a house that otherwise you'd be like looking for some sort of special program to help cover the upfront cost. But if there's wiggle room in your budget, you can get ahead of things. You can pretty quickly establish this is a healthier place to live. And I'm not saying that we should be greenwashing, but some of these things are more visible than others to tenants. Most people, even like hardcore environmentalists who want to rent a place, they're concerned about the location, how many bedrooms, does it look nice, how much closet space is there off-street parking, just very pragmatic things. And they could be as big a tree hugger as I am, and they won't even think to ask, what are the carbon emissions of this rental house compared to the average? Like, I mean, maybe like 1 in 1,000 people will get that wonky about it, but for the most part, it's a less direct process. And so it's all on the foundation of just, I'm going to be a really great real estate investor. I'm going to have all my financials in place. And then I can be intentional about upgrading the health, safety, the social impacts, the affordability, the energy efficiency, the carbon, the stormwater runoff, native plantings. I mean, all of the different dimensions of this very specifically green actions you could take for that property to make it a little greener, a little greener, a little greener, then you'll have some breathing room. You'll have some freedom to make choices. And that's what you're talking about the compound effect in the long term. But it's all built on a foundation of you got to know your stuff.
Yeah, you're taking the best of the real estate world with the best of more of the sustainable world and combining them together. And I work a lot with in the policy circles as well, of just what are municipalities doing to incentivize this behavior. And they do talk a lot about equity and access, and a lot of talk recently has been about the field of equity in terms of a tenant or a potential tenant knowing what the utility costs are going to be for that rental unit. And what frustrates me so much is that policymakers are so disconnected from the pragmatics of rental real estate that it's almost like you're speaking a different language. And recently we had an experience of listening to municipal policymakers and council members say, how do we get landlords to make energy efficient upgrades? And the prevailing solution was, we're going to carry a really big stick and create a policy to whack them if they don't do that. And we're going to give them a 5-year runway to do it. And you just have to scratch your head as a property owner and say,
that's the best you can come up with.
Right. Is that the best that you're going to come up with? Because not only are you going to have a lot of disenfranchised landlords out there and property owners that are, they do see it as this is another cost that's added on top. You might get disinvestment in your community, which has been happening in very policy heavy places. But it's just like, why are they failing to see you can carry a stick or you can carry a carrot? And how do you enable change at that level? That's one step above the boots on the ground, the rental property owner, to how do we do this on a municipal level? And so I do think that the work that you're doing now with your portfolio should certainly, these perspectives need to rise up and inform greater policy making to show that, hey, I can do this at affordable rent prices, provide a clean indoor air environment, but also have these positive externalities towards the environment, into the community, mm-hmm. and really go through a cycle of investing in our local communities. So that's why I love what you are doing and what you stand for. And I can't wait to see where you go with this, because it is vital. It is not just homeowners that can make the difference of increasing energy efficiency or sustainability, or even going beyond and looking at regenerative practices that they can do with their properties. That it's rental properties, it's commercial properties, it's land, it's agriculture, it all webs in together.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, Seth, where are you going to go from here? I'm really curious. Are you going to scale things up? Are you going to continue to do what you're doing? Or
I think the absolute key is to make some contacts and get into some real live conversation with other investors who are on the same wavelength about what we're talking about here. So I'm sure that there are hundreds of people like me who own some rentals, who really care about the environment and are looking for just what you asked. How do we make this real? What are the steps we take? How far can we go? How can we maximize the benefits that we're providing for the tenants, for the community, as well as for our business? Because it is a business, and that's part of sustainability, is can you make money at it in the long run? And that I want to generate a bit of a community effect here, so that we can start to have a green real estate investor mastermind group, and to pool this knowledge. And I will be producing things like, 100 green steps you can take for your rental property. And another thing that's pretty clear to me is that it's not just a single niche of identically minded green real estate investors, there's all different types. I mean, some people come at it from a more intellectual standpoint. They're thinking about smart homes and home energy management systems and getting very engineering about how they do it. And other people are like, they just want to have happy relationships with their tenants and help people. And they're more of a warm-hearted kind of emphasis in their green philosophy. And other people are out the adventure of it. One real estate investor I know, he bought a property in Mexico down near Acapulco and was creating this eco resort. And that was the exciting part for him, is like, let's do sustainable actions, but also something that's adventurous and fun and exotic. And so there's all these different places that investors are coming from. And I'm looking to help each of them. Like, well, what would be the most empowering steps for them to expand their portfolio and for the measurable results of it? Because ultimately, the environmental part will outlast our individual relationships with tenants and the current economics of the situation. We need to be thinking about if we're going to have a massive amount of regenerative and sustainable rental properties, millions and millions of them, because we actually want to protect the soil and the air and use resources wisely and create a housing stock where people are going to be living for 10, 20, 30, 50, 100 years. And it's going to be a healthy, life-enhancing place for them to live. It's these larger visions that start to happen when we combine our knowledge and we start to work together. So I mean, for me, the key is really starting to reach out and get in contact with people, and we can build these pathways and these resources together.
Oh, yeah, I think that's so exciting. And I love that you really broke it down of the array of interest of people that are getting into this. One thing that I do want to just ask about, because we've really dove into sustainability and regenerative systems, and you mentioned smart homes. People are really getting into that, because that's always a question that we get, especially from the media, of like, well, what kind of smart technology are you putting in these properties? And I think at first glance, we're like, oh, we can kind of wire it up with Bluetooth and everything, and like really kind of control all this. But the more we looked at the scientific research that was coming out of it, it was like, this is actually counteracting our immune systems, and it's creating really not healthy internal environments. Have you really gone into that space at all?
Well, I did a presentation on sustainability in real estate investing for a local real estate club over Zoom a couple of months ago. And we started to talk about smart thermostats and Nest thermostats. And the consensus, it was unanimous. All of the rental property owners that had those in their units said they don't work and people are frustrated with them. Even the really high tech ones that adjust to like when you're out of the house, when you're in the house, they say ultimately people will just change all the settings so that it's the same temperature all the time, 68 degrees or whatever, and it makes no darn bit of difference whatsoever. And I think that it's natural for the news media, for people in the culture in general. I mean, we love technology. It's very exciting. We like innovation. So if we want to try something new, we think that we need a technological solution for it. But almost across the board, like in my group houses, it's half the energy use per person. But that's just because we put more people in what used to be a gigantic, excessively large single family home. Everybody has much more affordable housing and they want to live there. And there was no computer programming involved in this, no complicated problem solving. It was just starting out with the intention and designing. So I think a big part of it, and I'm kind of thinking this through as I speak, but a lot of it has to do with design thinking and what is our intention? What kind of properties do we want to have available for people to live in? And how do we get there? Not taking what we've already got and trying to put a square peg in a round hole of the existing infrastructure. If it's not, we have to, like for transportation, if we change all of the gas powered cars to electric cars, yes, this will be more energy efficient, but how much fossil fuel do we have to burn in a transition? It'll be decades of massive industrial retrofitting to make that change. Whereas we could say, how about we all bike to work once a week? Or we carpool, boom. So a huge, I guess the broadest brushstroke I could say is there's design thinking and there's behavior change and there's the choices and the intentions we have, which are much simpler. And I almost feel like a kind of a sense of relaxation, like, oh, what if we had car sharing? That could be a thing. I'm working with a group that's creating an affordable housing co-op, and they're going to have 3 electric cars, and members of the house will be able to use those cars. So instead of having 10 fossil fuel vehicles going around, you have 3. And sure, it's a little complicated to get the insurance and buy the cars and get it set up, but you can do it. And now suddenly the carbon footprint of the people living in that rental property for their transportation needs is going to be 75% less. Boom.
Yeah, it's incredible that we've already got the solutions here. And I want people to really pick up on that. Sometimes it might be a little bit more inconvenient to the cultural lifestyles that we are living, but other times we're not designing the world for the next millennia. So Seth, where can people find more out about your sustainable real estate investing journey and the group that you are creating?
There's no infrastructure in place yet. There's no website to go to, anything like that. But you could put them in touch with me and give out my personal contact information. And as long as there's less than 10,000 people that are watching this that clamor to get in touch, we can set something up.
And if there is 10,000 people, please, let's reach out. Let's do this together because I'm really passionate about this. Seth, I know that you are extremely passionate about it. And I would love to see just a more ethical and environmental approach to real estate investing so that you can have a true triple bottom line approach, because this is truly what the world needs as well. So thank you for taking the time to come on. I appreciate it, and I am rooting for you on the sidelines here.
Wonderful. Thanks for your support. It's great to be here.
Okay, everybody, that is a wrap. This is another just great episode that I'm so glad that you're able to tune in. And thank you for being interested in regenerative real estate. What we are trying to do is help people and planet thrive together by using the built environment as a catalyst. And so I've got a couple big asks for you. Number one is, can you please go to wherever you're listening to this podcast, leave us a rating and review. Those actually go so far. And since this is such a passion project for us, we really want to be able to attract the best thought leaders from around the world. Second is that if you really like the content that we're putting out, you can find us on our own Medium publication called Regenerative Real Estate. We also have a very active community on Facebook, which is called Regenerative Real Estate and Design, which you can request to be a part of, and we would love to have you. And third, this goes to what we do every single day, helping buyers and sellers demystify sustainability by working with people that want to either buy a property and are trying to figure out the financing of how do I actually live out my values? How do I put that water catchment system on there? Or how do I go finance a solar panel PV array? Or maybe I want to live closer to nature. And what are the properties that are out there that I can do that? And so we represent buyers like that. We also happen to represent sellers that maybe they've already invested in sustainable features. Maybe they have a living building or a LEED certified project. We want to help tell that story. So much of what goes on in the real estate industry is transactional thinking at best, and it translates down into agents just really don't know anything about sustainability. And for us, we think that the value is there, and we want to help highlight really the intrinsic value of it, not just the bedrooms and the baths and the square feet of what typical marketing goes on. So if you know of anybody that wants to buy or sell these kinds of properties that we're talking about, please reach out to us at Latitude, and be sure to subscribe for another great episode coming up next week.